Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I want to talk about a business and recovery model that looks simple on the surface, but carries a much deeper structure underneath. Sober living homes. At first glance, the idea feels hopeful and direct. Stay in a sober home for a period of time, get stable, rebuild your habits, and work your way back to family, work, and ordinary life. That is the visible promise. But underneath that promise is a system where housing, recovery, rules, and relapse risk are tied together in one place. This is not just shelter, it is recovery structured through occupancy. It is important because it shows where sober living really exists, not in theory, but in ordinary residential neighborhoods. It looks like a house, a porch, a yard, the same built environment as everyone else. That normal appearance is part of what makes this lane interesting. The visible image is a home, but the hidden reality is that the home is also a behavioral environment. The bed is tied to sobriety. The address is tied to rules. The house may look ordinary from the street, but inside it often functions as a structured recovery setting. Let's go into the human side of the business. Inside a sober home or in the linked recovery environment around it, people talk, confess, listen, and confront those hard truths about their lives. That is what makes sober living more than just a rental arrangement. The house is not only selling a room, it is selling a culture of recovery, accountability, and emotional work. The visible service looks supportive. The hidden model is that recovery behavior becomes part of what justifies continued housing. Let's strengthen that point. Here we see the group circle dynamic. People standing together, sharing space, being held inside a common standard. That is one of the deepest part of the sober home model. The house works because people are not supposed to recover in isolation. Peer accountability becomes part of that product. And that means the business is not only leasing beds, it is organizing social pressure, routine, and recovery identity inside the same physical structure. This is where this topic becomes especially revealing. Recovery housing is often presented in moral or therapeutic language, but there is also a business model here. Monthly cash flow, operating a transitional or sober home, maintaining occupancy, all that reminds us that this is not only a caring space, it can also be an operator model built around people who need a structured place to stay. That does not automatically make it bad, but it does make the topic more honest. The visible language is prevention and recovery. The hidden structure is recurring bed revenue tied to a tenuous sobriety. One of the hardest tensions of the whole topic is when people picture sober homes in theory, they often imagine recovery, stability, and second chances. But when neighbors see several single men outside a house hanging around with no visible work or family routine, that conversation changes drastically. Now the issue becomes loitering, neighborhood identity, safety for the children, and resentment. That is why sober homes carry a strong, not in my backyard element. Inside the house, the issue is recovery. Outside the house, the issue becomes legitimacy and how much the community can tolerate. Let's take the topic from the neighborhood discomfort into public conflict. Once sober homes multiply, or once bad operators create problems, the legal and political pushback begins. lawmakers, municipalities, and regulators start asking where these homes can operate, how they should be licensed, what standards should apply, and whether the community has any real control. That is what makes this such a compelling business issue. It is not only about recovery, it is about regulation, rights, local power, and who gets to define the line between treatment support and the neighborhood burden. Let's go back to the residents themselves. For the people inside the house, sober living may be one of the few places where they are surrounded by others who understand recovery from the inside. That shared identity can be incredibly important. It can create discipline, friendship, and a sense of belonging that people may not find elsewhere. So, the sober home is not just a property, it is a social organism. The business works partly because residents are not only paying for space, they are often paying for separation from the environments that previously supported their relapse. There is also a leadership side of the model. Sober homes also often depend on operators, house managers, peer leaders, or staff who embody authority inside the recovery environment. These figures may not always look like formal clinicians, but they still shape the culture, enforce the rules, and determine how the house functions. That is important because sober living is not the same as inpatient rehab. It usually offers less clinical intensity, but it still has authority structures that decide who belongs, who is slipping, and who may have to leave the premises. This final takeaway gives the presentation its emotional center. A young man in recovery is looking out over a beautiful landscape associated with hedonist pleasure, abundant nightlife, freedom, and temptation. Wow, the question on the screen asks whether sober living is suitable for young adults in recovery. That is exactly the right closing tension. Sober living is not just about getting someone away from substances, it is about asking whether recovery can survive in a culture that normalizes partying, drinking, and constant, unending temptation. So, the deeper question becomes this: is a sober home simply a supportive house? Or is it a hidden business model built around making fragile sobriety livable in a world that keeps pulling people back the other way? Thank you.